Hey everybody, I'm Chris. I just wanted to say a few words about Lloyd and how honored we are to have him here. Lloyd, for old timers out there like me, who remembers the Whole Earth catalog? All right, it was the Bible. All right, I mean, I was a kid, but it was the Bible. It taught you how to do the things that we're doing here. Came out in '69, maybe. Lloyd was the shelter editor of the Whole Earth catalog, the original. So Lloyd has been doing this forever. He knows everybody in the business. He's done domes, he's done tiny houses, he's done redwood houses and Big Sur. I can't think of anything he hasn't done. Plus, he's a surfer, he's a skateboarder, he's a mountain biker. Do you dance on tables, Lloyd? No, okay, he doesn't yet dance on tables, but he has been around and he brings a wealth of experience and knowledge. He's published over a dozen books, I don't even know how many, in his own publishing house, Shelter Publications. So please welcome Lloyd. It's a real honor to have him here in Crestone. And he's going to talk for about half an hour and then do Q&A. So note your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Usually, in fact, every time I've done something like this, I've had a slideshow. So this is something new for me. Of all the books I did, the book Builders of the Pacific Coast is kind of my favorite for the reason that I tried to take people along with me riding shotgun, visiting these builders. And so that's what I'll try to do here. I don't know how far I'll get with my building career. When I was about 3 years old, my folks got this little workbench, a little wooden workbench, and it had a circular hole, a triangular hole, and a square hole, and pegs of the same shape, and a little wooden mallet. And I remember hammering those things in the hole and in the holes. And then they had a thing called log cabins, which were these before Legos, they were little logs that were notched and you could build log cabins. And so I kind of got started early thinking about building. When I was about 12, my dad built a house up in the Sacramento Valley, a concrete block house, and my job was to shovel sand and cement and gravel into a concrete mixer. And so we would go up there and work on the weekends. And I liked doing that, but what I really liked was when we got the house, the blocks built and the roof framed, they gave me a carpenter's apron and some nails and a hammer and let me nail down the sheathing. And it didn't make too much difference if I missed because nobody was going to see it. The next building experience I had when I was 18, I worked on the docks in San Francisco for a shipwright. When San Francisco used to be a shipping town before it became a tourist town. And the ships would come in and they would load up in the holds. And then after they were loaded, we would go in and build wooden frameworks to hold the cargo in when the ship went out to sea. I guess the next thing that happened was I ran a newspaper in the Air Force for 2 years on an Air Force base in Germany. It was called the Sembach Jet Gazette. And I got out in 1960 and moved back to Mill Valley and went into the insurance business with my dad and my brother and my uncle. My wife of the time and I we bought a 3/4 of an acre land in Mill Valley that had a summer house and 2 cottages and a carport. And so right away I wanted to make the carport into 2 studios. So I had a friend who was in his last year at architecture school at UC Berkeley, and he drew up the plans. And the first place I built was a sod roof house, we called it then. They call it natural roof now. And as I said before, then the next project was to do a very substantial remodel of the old summer house. And so John drew up these plans that were way over my head, even for an experienced builder. A lot of it was, maybe half of the walls were poured concrete, and some of the walls were 10 feet high. And so when you're pouring concrete that high, you have to use what they call snap ties. And so I had to learn as I went along. And when I started on the house, I started to work on the foundation, and my friend Bob was working with me. And I said, well, what do we do, Bob? And he said this, and he picked up the shovel and started digging. And so that's kind of been my modus operandi ever since. It's also the same thing when I do books. I just get the material together and figure it out as I go. I don't necessarily recommend that for everyone, but it's good to have some good plans to go along with. But to get started, and you will, most people can work with their hands. So I worked on that house for 3 or 4 years. Everything was, the 60s were a big part of my life and my building experience. And the 60s were, so I was getting less and less interested in being an insurance broker. And I was working at nights and weekends on building this house in Mill Valley. And I liked the building more and more and the building less and less. And I started smoking weed in about 1964. And that sort of gave me a different outlook on things. I started looking at things differently. And with respect to the 60s, I just made some notes on what was going on back then. It wasn't that these things were new. It was that they were being discovered by the baby boom, which was this huge block of people. Organic farming, ecology, political activism, getting out of Vietnam, Buddhism, Taoism, Islam. When I went to Stanford, the one course that all freshmen had to take was on Western civilization. So we had no idea of anything outside of European history. The I Ching, the Tarot. Alice Bailey wrote a great book called Esoteric Astrology. And all the divine proportion. We were interested in crafts and weaving and other ways of building domes, the Airstream trailers. The ant farm was building air buildings. And then materials like straw bale, cob, rammed earth, foam shot out of guns. All these things we were looking into. We sort of thought that everything needed to be re-examined, and maybe crafts, revival of the crafts. So anyway, I got that house maybe 2/3 finished, and an architect came over. He liked the rough timbers that I was using, and he had bought all the redwood timbers from a bridge across the Russian River at Duncan's Mills, which the bridge had been made out of redwood, and they tore it down to rebuild a concrete bridge. So he had 12 by 12s that were hand hewn. They still had adze marks in them, and 6 by 16s and 8 by 22s. If you imagine how big an 8 by 22 is, and these were 16 feet long. So George had a job in Big Sur, building a house on a cliff above the ocean, and asked me if I wanted to be the foreman on the job, and went down there and we slept out on the building site in sleeping bags. I said, sure. And so I took 2 brothers with me who were builders, and we moved down to this 400-acre ranch in Big Sur. This was about 1967, and everything was going on in San Francisco at the time. It was gearing up for the, quote, Summer of Love, which was actually the end of everything. And just a few things, I mean, this isn't really about building, but it's about the times. In January of 1967 was what they called the Human Be-In. It was a gathering in the Golden Gate Park of all the rock and, it was a beautiful day, all the rock and roll bands, the Grateful Dead, the Jefferson Airplane, the Quicksilver Messenger Service were all in flatbed trucks. Suzuki Roshi was there, Gary Snyder, Allen Ginsberg, Leary, and Alpert. And it was one of those sweet spots in time. Everything was wonderful. And when it came to a conclusion, Ginsberg said, now practice some kitchen yoga and pick up everything. And so the polo grounds were left spotless. Well, word of that got out across the country. Then in the same year, in June of '67 was the Monterey Pop Festival, and that was such a wonderful event. I mean, way different from Woodstock, and so those two things brought 100,000 kids to San Francisco in what they call the Summer of Love. And luckily, I think for me, I was down in Big Sur at the time. So in building this house, the architect had the rafters were spliced together, 16-foot 8x22s. So when we spliced them together, each one of those weighed about 800 pounds. And the ranch foreman luckily rigged up a boom on the tractor to help us lift them up. But we were getting bogged down by this really heavy house. It had 52 different individual places we had to pour concrete outside the perimeter walls where the posts were going to go, and the concrete had to come down 40 miles down the coast from Monterey. And at about that time, this difficult job, Buckminster Fuller came to Esalen, and we went to see him speak, and he talked about these gossamer geodesic domes. And so Paul and I started building dome models. I should watch my time here. Oh my God, I'm 10. Well, so in that year, there was going to be a big festival in Golden Gate Park called the Wild West Festival. And all the bands were going to appear for free. And so I was proposed that we build an 80-foot dome in a meadow there for the bands to play, and the speakers could be hung from the dome struts, and we could shoot photographs. And we were going to paint the dome green on the outside so to blend it in with the grass, and blue on the inside so it blended in with the sky. And so I had a model that I was going up to San Francisco. We were all meeting to plan this big thing. And when I went back home down to Big Sur, there was we met some people at the beach there who were from an alternative high school. It was teachers and students, and it was their graduation, and they had all taken acid. And so we started talking, and they wanted to convert the school into a boarding school. And so I said, well, I showed them the dome. So eventually they hired me to move to the school to build domes for the kids to live in. You know what I did? I totally forgot to tell you about the house I built. After I quit the job on the ranch, because I just couldn't get along with the architect anymore, before Pacific High School, I built a house 2 miles north of Esalen out of mostly used wood. And the wood for the shingles, the shakes, was from redwood that I got in the woods. And it was like a big shed was what it was. And I terraced the hillside for a farm. I developed a spring 600 feet above the house for water, and planned to, be as self-sufficient as possible. And when you start trying to be self-sufficient, you realize you can't be self-sufficient. It's a direction. It's like perfection. You never get there. But the idea was to do as much for yourself as you could. So I built that house pretty much by myself. I'm okay at getting the foundation done and the house framed, but then when it comes to interior work, I need to get help because I'm not a good cabinet maker. But anyway, we lived down there for a couple of years, and when we did meet the people from Pacific High School, we were ready to leave Big Sur. And so the Pacific High School was one of those schools, alternative schools that were around in those days. The John Woolman School was another one in California, and the people that ran, or like the Waldorf schools. And this school, Pacific, had been started by Amish Quakers. And then in the later 60s, I guess 66, 67, The kids who were going to school all had long hair and were like dope-smoking hippies. And they were bringing the kids up. The school was on a 40-acre piece of land in the hills above Saratoga, California. So the director of the school and the financial manager were accepting kids as if it was a boarding school. And the reason they wanted to make it into a boarding school because it was so expensive to bring the kids up from the valley, what we call the flatlands, and which is now Silicon Valley, in buses. So anyway, they were accepting kids. I didn't really know this as if it were a boarding school, but there was as a room and board, but there was no room. And so about 30 kids showed up in September, and there was no place for them to live. And so we got building domes. We were all camping out under parachutes, and the times were, those times were really difficult to describe. We had a lake on the property where we all went swimming, the teachers and the kids, and with no clothes. And could you imagine if you tried to do that nowadays? The teachers would have all been thrown in jail. But that was just the way it was. And we couldn't really control the kids because it was open land, and they would take acid and wander in the woods when they first got there. But anyway, the first year was pretty good because we were all working together. And so over a 2-year period, we built 17 different geodesic domes. We built them out of, the first year we built 10 of them out of plywood, and they tended to leak. And then the next year we were trying experimental things with foam, and my partner Jay Baldwin built a dome out of electrical conduit struts covered with vinyl pillows inflated with nitrogen. And Bucky Fuller came to the school and liked it so much he hired Jay to build a dome on his property. But anyway, the second year at that school, and we were experimenting with solar heating. We had a guy there who was building a wind turbine. In those years, so that was over 50 years ago. We were trying to generate electricity and provide hot water with sun and wind and water. The second year at the school, it just started to kind of fall apart. I'd been having second thoughts about domes, at least the kind of domes we were building. And so we did, in 1970, we did, I was, about that same time, I was the shelter editor of the Whole Earth Catalog. Stuart Brand was the main editor, and he hired different people to do different sections. Rosemary and Dick did the gardening part. Peter Warshall did the land use. And so we would, each one of us would go in for maybe 2 or 3 weeks and use the equipment to make the book, the equipment consisted of an IBM Composer, which was for typesetting, and a Polaroid camera. And so I learned how to make books through Stuart. And so at even when I was in Big Sur, and I had built domes, the only mathematics for domes then had been published in Popular Science magazine. It's called a sun dome. And so if you got a hold of those, you had the measurements, and that's what I did. And people started writing me for the mathematics, and I started writing them letters, and I realized that I was writing the same letter over and over again. Why don't I just mimeograph something up? And while I'm at it, why don't I throw in ecology and communication with dolphins and all of the other things that we were into. Oh yeah, one of the other things that was happening in those years that I didn't mention was underground newspapers, like the Berkeley Barb and the LA Free Times. And so when I was living in Big Sur, I was subscribing to those newspapers, trying to keep up with what was going on. At my age, I lose the thread sometimes of what I'm talking about. And it happens all the time. And I'm telling somebody a story. Like I was telling somebody a story about my 1960 Volkswagen bus that had 40 horsepower. And we drove it to New York wrapped up in sleeping bags to keep warm. One winter, we drove it into Puerto Vallarta before there was a bridge into Puerto Vallarta. So I'm telling this story about and I completely forgot why I was telling the story. And the person I'm talking to always knows every single time they know that, oh, well, that was because you were talking about. So I'm just trying to go back to what where I was talking about domes here. Yeah, at the school, we did some domes out of aluminum. Jay did his domes out of vinyl pillows. Pittsburgh plate glass had just developed foam shot out of a gun, and they wanted to experiment with it. And so after the fact that I was thinking of publishing something, about that same time, the dome factors and the organic gardening and all that stuff that I'd been learning about in that list I read, I met Stuart Brand, and he was way ahead of me, and that's when I joined forces with him. So anyway, at the school, after the first year of building, we did Dome Book 1, and we borrowed the whole earth equipment to do it with, production equipment. We printed 5,000 copies, and we distributed through a distributor in Berkeley called Book People, and the 5,000 copies sold boom like that. By the time that happened and the book was published, we were halfway through the second year of building, and so we decided to do a second book called Dome Book 2. And so in May of 1971, and I've been building domes for about 4 years. We rented an old a resort in the Santa Barbara Mountains off season. And so we had little cabins and a main room where we did the production. So we hauled all the whole earth production equipment down there. And we were driving there in a van, and I'd been having all these problems with domes, and I was looking at the buildings by the side of the road, these farm buildings, barns and chicken coops. I was thinking, that's a vertical wall, and that's a roof that comes off that wall. There's only one angle on that roof, and we're trying to, we had 130 seams to seal, and so I started having doubts about domes then. So back to the school, I left the school and moved to Bolinas, where I bought a piece of land for $6,000, and I wanted to build one more dome because I wasn't happy with the domes that we built there. And so the building inspector was a good guy, and he let me do it, and I built what I thought was a really beautiful dome. And it was in Life magazine, a 2-page color spread of it, and it was built with recycled wood, not the framework, recycled wood, and then for the exterior shakes, I got redwood logs down on the beach that were getting washed up, and I went down with a chainsaw and cut them into bolts and split the shakes. And so I was living in that dome, and another bit of my drug history here. One day I took some psilocybin, and I walked up a canyon and had a wonderful day watching the water skeeters, and I came back down the canyon, and there was a beautiful meadow there, and I thought, what if all these doubts about domes were just, heavy on my mind. And I thought, what if there was a dome in that meadow and it was falling apart? It was made of plastic. It wasn't decomposing well. And the reason that it was there was because I had written a book about how to build domes. And Dome Book 2 was actually a very good book. It was just on the wrong subject. And so that afternoon, I called up my agent at Random House. And by that time, I'd moved to Random House for distribution. And by that time, we had printed 160,000 copies of Dome Book 2. And because we all thought domes were the way to go back then. And that they superseded stud frame building. So I called my agent and I said, Don, I'm taking Dome Book 2 out of print. And he said, are you crazy? He said, it's selling I said, I don't want any more domes on my karma. And I figured that I had maybe 250,000 people had read that book or more. And that I wanted to show people all of the other ways to build. And there's kind of something about going in one way in the wrong direction, sort of. And I don't mean that to apply to the domes that we're talking about, people are talking about here, but the kind of domes we were building. So I took a couple of cameras, one filled with Tri-X and one with color slide film, and traveled across this country and across Canada, and went to England, where I learned a lot about building. And so gathered material, and kind of the same way I build. I gathered material, and Bob Easton, who was an architect just starting out, he moved to Bolinas, got him a place to live for 3 months, and we put shelter together 2 pages at a time. Took us about 3 months to do it. And we had printed up a poster before that saying, with a whole bunch of pictures on it, saying, we're doing this book, send material into us if you can. And so all the material was there. So we put that book together and published Shelter, and printed 50,000 copies the first run, which you would never do now. And they sold, boom, another 50,000, another 50,000. And I was in the publishing business. And then I kind of went back to work building and doing some small-scale farming. And in 1978, I did a book called Shelter 2, which wasn't really like, there's no book quite like Shelter. It's just a product of its times and of a lot of different things that came together then. Shelter 2 was a more serious book on basically how to build a stud frame house. And after that was completed, I figured that was the end of my publishing career. And a couple of years, so I was working gardening and farming, and selling apple juice and milk and eggs, and trying to make it that way. And I had a sore back, and I saw a book in the Whole Earth magazine called Stretching. And I sent away for the book and did the stretches, and it worked, helped me with my stretching problem. And it was basically a book for athletes. And it was, if you're a football player, here's the stretches you do. If you're a hockey player, if you're a baseball, basketball. And I found the guy who wrote the book. His name was Bob Anderson, living in LA. It was a homemade book. So I called him up and I said, how many copies of that book have you sold? And he said, 35,000. And it was just the beginning of the fitness boom in the 80s. And I said, well, what about some stretches for carpenters and waitresses and truck drivers? And he said, yeah. So eventually, Bob and Gene moved to Bolinas for, I think they were there 3 or 4 months, and we redid the book and republished the book Stretching through Random House. Again, we printed 50,000 copies, the first printing, and it sold like wildfire. And to date, that book has sold 3.5 million copies, and it's in 23 languages. It's in Latvian, and it's provided half of my income for 40 years. If I were just to have done the building books, I've done about 38 or 39 books total, and about 14 of them are on building. But if I had just done the building books, I would have been bankrupt a long time ago. So, and then I did a book on running and a book on weightlifting. So I did fitness books for about 20 years. And so those 3 books were very successful. And I kind of I thought, to the end of the line there. And I went up to Mendocino County. A guy who used to live next to me said, come on up and see. He was a grower, and a lot of the solar, off-grid solar stuff was financed by dope growers in Mendocino County and Humboldt County. Anyway, Jack said to come up and see his house, and I shot some photos of it. And he said, "There's a guy who wants to meet you." And he said, so we we drove. This was Point Arena, which is about 45 minutes south of the town of Mendocino. So we drove about 5 miles out into the country to the Garcia River. And we drove down into this glen, and there was this beautiful little building there, just stunning. It was the most beautiful building I had ever seen. And it was a shop, actually, and a little bedroom adjacent to it. And there were two big doors that opened out. So Louis comes out, who I'd never met before, and he doesn't even say hello. And he's got an old tattered copy of Shelter. And he says, "Crouch down here." And he opens up Shelter, and there's a painting of a Mandan Earth Lodge in the early, like page 4 of Shelter, which had 4 posts in the center of a octagonal building. And he says, "You see that?" And he says, "Look up." And so I looked up, and the framing of his shop was, he said, "I based this building on your book." And then it turned out he also had built his own home was across the river. He based that on a drawing of a Japanese farmhouse in Shelter. And to get to that place, you go on a zip line, a 500-foot zip line across the river. You can drive across in the summer, but in the winter, the river's up. And the first time I ever go 30 feet up into a tower, and you hook a bosun's chair onto a cable. He's got a little wooden brake on there. And I said, "No way." And he said, no, just let go. So let go, and gravity 500 feet across the river into a little landing platform. And then to get back, the same thing, another cable coming 500 foot back. And so anyway, I thought, well, if this guy has built these things out of Shelter, I should get back into doing building books. So I did the book Homework, and Louis the number one builder in that book. And it shows his little sauna that he built on a Toyota chassis that he could pull back from the river in the wintertime, and just an incredible builder. And I guess the last thing I'll say here was, so I went on, and then I'll just talk about one more book and one more builder. And I'm fascinated with builders and with buildings and with homes. And I think the thing is that my main thing is to do it yourself. And I tell people nowadays, your computer's not going to build a house for you. You're going to still use a hammer and a saw, and maybe it'll be a nail gun and an electric saw, but you still are going to, you're still going to have to use your body to build a house. So anyway, I was going to do a book called Builders in general, and I had a really great builder in Telluride that I covered, and I met these builders in Vermont, in the Green Mountains of Vermont. Dave Sellers and a bunch of his friends, just some outstanding things built there. And then I went up to British Columbia, and when I got up to British Columbia, a friend of mine named Godfrey Stevens had been telling me to come up there for years. As soon as I got to one of these islands, Denman Island and Hornby Island, I realized that I had a book on just more than enough material on that area alone. So I started traveling around, and that was, of all my books, that was the one book where it's kind of like a journey, because about 80% of the pictures in that book are my own, where the other books are a lot more pictures come in from other people. So anyway, people told me about this builder, and I saw a couple of buildings that were just absolutely stunning. And so when I meet the builder of my dreams, his name is Lloyd House. And so I spent a lot of time with him, and I really do recommend that book, that you look at what he's done. Just tremendous stuff that he's done. So anyway, so I went on and did a bunch of other books, Tiny Homes on the Move, The Half Acre Homestead, which is my wife and I building for almost 50 years, the homestead and the chickens and the garden and the house. And then the last book I did was called Rolling Homes, and I sold my business as of this year, and I'm communicating through Instagram and Substack, thanks to Chris, who told me about it, and I haven't quite got rolling on Substack, and I'll probably do one more book as an author, not a publisher, and it'll probably be called Learning to Build, and I'll throw in all the stuff I left out here today. And so that's what I'm up to now. It's the first cross-country trip I've taken, and I'm just knocked out by this place and by what everybody's doing around here. I mean, I don't think there's any place in the world where there's this variety of building going on. And you're lucky that the building codes are not, the inspector isn't here yet. Although there are some, the plumbing and wiring are something that should be done well. And structural, structural stability is another thing, although I'm kind of paranoid because I live on the San Andreas Fault. And so we're really conscious about shear being the bracing of walls so that when the building shakes, it doesn't fall down. But anyway, I went out on the tour this morning, and I almost got the idea. I didn't want to do any more building books, but I almost got the idea. Maybe I'd do a book on building materials, these days. And but there's such a variety going on here. Okay, the last thing I will say is that what I've got around to for myself in building is stud frame construction. Because I want to build something quickly, and maybe it's my old age. Maybe if I were younger, I wouldn't mind fooling around with a hexagonal floor plan, or dome, or cob. Or I like straw bale a lot, and I'm really good friends with Bill and Athena Steen. I've spent a lot of time with them. Rammed earth is something that I think highly of, but it's an amazing amount of work. I did see some things out here today that I thought, wow, that appeals to me. But anyway, when you talk about building materials, whether it's hempcrete or rammed earth or straw bales, you're just talking about the walls, because the roof is always going to be wood, pretty much, unless it's steel. So I don't know what the percentage of material that goes into the walls as opposed to the roof, but 15% in the walls? No, 50% in the roof. 15% of the house is the walls? Well, but not 85%. I'm talking about the lumber. 85% in the roof? Whatever. Oh, yeah. So, but anyway, that's what the thing about stud frame construction is. You can put your insulation, your wiring, and your plumbing inside the walls. You've just got one interior surface, one exterior surface. So that's just me, and I like working with wood. And so if I were to build a house now, I would build. Because I've spent so much time dodging rectangles with what we call circle madness. And I do love the feeling of a round building, and a lot of the things we were aiming at back then. But one of the builders I interviewed in Shelter, he said, you want a sweater, you don't spend your life knitting the sweater. You knit the sweater, you put it on, and you go on with your life. And so that's kind of where and I wrote something on, if you look on Substack, I wrote a post said, what would I do if I were going to build now? And one of the things I thought of recently was, okay, if I was a young person, say in my 30s, what I would maybe do is I'd try to save up enough money to live on for a year. Maybe it'd take me 5 years or 10 years, but save up enough money, and then you take that year and you build your house. And or you just peck away at it. You do it bit by bit. Like I started building on weekends when I was in the insurance business. And I really do like the idea of metal roofing. And a friend of mine up in a climate similar to this, and I think people around here are doing the same thing. He's got heated water on the roof, solar heated water going down into the floor. And he says that everybody around there burns 6 cords of wood a year, and he burns 1 cord. But I think you guys are into all that stuff. You understand all that stuff, and I'm delighted to be here and see all of this stuff going on. So thank you very much. Any questions? Is there another? Yeah.
I'm right here. So just state your name and.
Yeah, okay. Chuck Reel, I was curious as to what, since you seem fascinated with Crestone and you've seen all this new stuff and you've seen all the old stuff too, if you were going to build today, what would be the type of material you would use for that house?
Well, what would I do today? I guess it would depend on where I was. If I was living where I live now, I would build a stud frame house. And like somebody was talking about hemp insulation, I got some hemp insulation, but it wasn't very good R factor. And so I'm sorry to say I used fiberglass insulation in the last place I built. But I'm not into it like I would have been years ago. But if I were here, I don't know what I would do here. I mean, I like these blocks that were being used today, and also these earth bags that were being used. I forget the guy's name, but it's a really nice timber framed house with earth bags. And so I'm not sure. I mean, I know the thing is, I know that stud frame is quick, and I know how to do it, and so that would be one of my choices. But I'm tempted by a lot of the other things I see going on here. Yeah.
Hello. Lloyd, can you tell folks the name of your Substack?
Yeah, it's just Lloyd Kahn Substack, and you can subscribe free. And I haven't really I thought I'd be able to do it posts on the road, but that's proven more difficult. I did one post. Chris let me use his office yesterday, so I got off one hurried post. But I've realized that I'm a lot better when I'm doing it at home, and I can do Instagram from the road. But I mean, that's kind of I really do like Substack. I mean, I quit doing a blog, and I like it, the fact that it's for writers, that there's no gatekeepers, there's no advertising, there's no algorithms that they're fucking you over with, like Instagram, like Facebook does on Instagram. And so, anyway, you just look up my name in Substack. And then you'll get the way it works is each time I do a post, you get an email. Unless you say you don't want the emails. And I've done a post yesterday from this trip, and I did a post from Burning Man. I probably was the oldest person in the history of Burning Man. I'm 54 years older than the average burner, who's 35. So I've got a different angle, which I haven't written about yet. I've got a bunch of stuff to say about Burning Man.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
My question for you was, when you changed your approaches to building over the years, did you run into any sort of anger? Because there's kind of a religious feeling around, I'm a dome person, or I'm a hempcrete person, or this or that. And how did you deal with that?
Well, there was a big building conference in L.A. I mean, Buckminster Fuller, Paolo Soleri, and I was one of the lesser people there. But I did we used to do slideshows, and they were really good slideshows because the kids at the school were photogenic. I mean, the kids had long hair. They were building their own houses. The geometric pattern of domes is photogenic. And so we do a slideshow playing the Rolling Stones. We do like 45-minute slideshows with the Rolling Stones or some rock and roll music. They were very popular. So, but by the time I had given up on domes and I'd gone to Europe, so I was to do a presentation at this building conference in LA. So the first slide I showed was a field in Ireland with stone walls and a cottage with a thatched roof. And I said, you know why that looks so good there? Because they cleared the fields to plant their barley, and they used the stones to build the walls around the field, and then they also built the walls of the house with those stones. And when they harvested the barley, they used the stalks to make the roof, and everything is right from the site there. It's local materials. And I said, with a dome, you're building the same structure no matter where you are, no matter where on the earth you are. And anyway, so I went on to list the other. I feel kind of bad because there are some really nice domes around here. But anyway, back then there weren't, to my knowledge, and so I lost the thread again here. Yeah. See, somebody always knows that it's not me. They practically threw tomatoes at me. You know, they were really pissed off at me, and dome people are still angry with me. Finally, you know, there was a period of maybe 20 years ago when there was a resurgence in domes, and so I started getting letters again. I thought I'm writing the same letter over and over again, so I did a newsprint publication called Refried Domes. And I said, here's my experience, and this is who I am, and this is why they don't work for me. But, you know, if you want to build a dome, here's the mathematics. And so if you look up refried domes and my name online, you'll see the reason I'll just tell you a couple of things. You have to cut your wood into small pieces, which is not renewable. The whole surface is a roof. If I want to add on to a vertical wall, I just build a roof off of it. If I want to add on to a multifaceted wall, I've got to tie into all these different angles. If I want to subdivide a geodesic dome, I've got to tie into all the angles inside, and it's awkward. As one room, as one space, it's pretty nice. There are a lot of things good about it. We are vertical to the earth, and chests of drawers and refrigerators and stoves and beds are rectangles. It's easy to fit them in. You go to fit them into a dome or an A-frame at the apex of the A-frame, you've got problems. So I just got around to, there were other things I wanted to do in my life rather than screw around with difficulties like that. But maybe there are certainly people who want to make it an art. But I just say, you know, watch out for building from an abstract concept, because it's going to take you a lot more time and money. And maybe you want to do that, but I don't. You know, I want to go on and, you know, I want to jump in the water or do something fun instead of, you know, fitting dihedral angles, you know.
Hello, my name's Paul Lundquist. I live in Silo, North Carolina, and I came here to say thank you to Lloyd Kahn for saving my life 55 years ago. And the mechanics of that were that I got drafted in 1969, and I enlisted, and I spent 4 years active. And during those 4 years, I was sustained by what I call the dream that many, many of us had. And it was back to the land, build your own house, make your living with your hands, work for yourself, marry a fine woman, and all the rest of it. And I did that because I stayed sane enough to not get a court-martial or something. So I got to say that we've been talking a lot here about building systems and the rest. There's another dimension I call the social mycelium. All the people getting together, making all the connections, and Crestone is wonderful. So what Lloyd did in editing and writing in the Whole Earth Catalog, the Dome Books, Shelter, all of which I bought new and devoured, is still going on, because I didn't know Crestone existed a month ago until I saw your post in the letter from California, and I'm here because of that.
Wow.
And everything today has been wonderful, and the social mycelium continues to expand, and you're still doing it, because you got me here now, and you got me somewhere 55 years ago. So thank you, man.
That's one of the nicest things anybody's ever said. Yeah, it makes it all worthwhile. Wow. Well,
Um,
anything
I,
else?
yeah, I too want to thank you. I'm right here. I'm right here.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. Okay. I can stand up. There we go. Okay, cool. Sorry. But I want to thank you too. I mean, Shelter really inspired me, and I built here, and I've been building for a long, long time, and all of that really inspired me. So I want to personally thank you for that. I also wanted to ask you. You said that you kind of hobnobbed with Paulo Soleri at a certain point, and that's a completely different model of civilization, if you will. And I'd just love to hear your opinion on where he went with the concept of shelter and architecture and all that. So,
Well, when we visited him, we wrote him. This was probably 63, 64, and he hadn't started that big building of his, Arco Santi, but it was pretty incredible. I mean, he was in. He had a piece of land near Scottsdale. It was very hot, and he had just built what I thought was the best thing he ever did was a studio that he built by mounding up the earth and carving lines in it, and then pouring concrete on that, and then excavating. And it really worked in the desert. It was cool, and he was really nice. He was using he was doing drawings on butcher paper and using his daughter's crayons to draw. And he and a guy named Mark Mills had built a house out in the desert. They gave us the key to, and we went out and looked at that. And so it was pretty wonderful to visit with him. And I also went to Arco Santi. That was a whole other thing. And and he was supporting himself by making wind chimes. He'd make a form in the sand and pour the whatever it was, brass. And so that was, and on the same trip we went and camped out on the ruins of a Frank Lloyd Wright house and so we were looking at, when I started to build, we were looking at architects, Soleri and Frank Lloyd Wright and Bernard Maybeck and Julia Morgan were the architects in the San Francisco Bay Area that I really liked, the arts and crafts movement. But if John had, when I did that remodel, instead of designing this house, which it's kind of like architects want to make a mark. They want to do something extraordinary. They want to do something that's going to look good in a magazine. If he just said to me, hey, look, you can just excavate the rotten back part of the house and just build some new walls and not do grading, and it would have been so much simpler, and so that's why I try to talk people out of building from an abstract concept, and keeping in mind that you want, if that's what you want. I mean, in shelter, I want a place to eat and sleep and heal and listen to music and stay out of the rain. And I don't need it to be a work of art, but I mean, there are some wonderful works of art, but that's just me.
Keep it simple.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
One more over here. We just shared the stage together, so it was nice to meet you. I like the fact that the story that I'm hearing is unexpected. What you've said about domes and architecture that is unconventional, artistic architecture, that's some of the stuff that in the beginning is what really inspired me to push forth into the world, to find more builders, more examples. And of course, I've learned what you're saying about rectangular infrastructure of all kinds. And so I was talking to Sean, and he said that there might be some collaboration afoot between the two of us. I just wanted to let you know that I don't have a dogma about what techniques I'm going to be using. I'm interested in your work with tiny homes and have a property here. I wonder if you would be open to meeting up at some point. I don't know how long you're going to be in town, but I'd love to show you what we're working on and get your perspective and maybe work together on a project.
Well, I could meet with you. I don't know if I could work with you. I've kind of got a overload of things to do right now. Yeah, let's talk
Great.
while I'm here.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it sounded like you were open to releasing another book that covers some more of the territory that you
Maybe,
have
but it
not.
would probably be 3 years, 2-3 years down the line.
Perfect. Well, I'd love
Yeah.
to contribute to that if I
Sure.
can with some of the documentation that I've done for the last 10 years with all these other techniques if you need
Okay.
that.
Sure. Okay.
So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I know that your books have influenced many here, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks.
My name is Brad Cattell, Tiny Texas Houses.
Oh,
I came here
Brad.
to see you.
We've corresponded for years.
Oh, yes, he's a photo hog. He put
Yeah.
it to me when I was sending him pictures. He said, send more. And it's like a wonderful thing. Lloyd contacted me years ago. I'm on the front cover of his Tiny Houses book, and it was the greatest honor.
Get your mic closer to
Oh,
your
it was the
mouth.
greatest honor to have him contact me for my book, or for his book, for the front picture on it, the rainbow in the house. And he's one of my heroes. So when the call came, I thought I was being pranked. What? Really? You want me? But truly inspirational in many ways. And I'm only 69, but honestly, this is what it's all about. The first vessel, the first home is here. Everything else is what we create from here. And he's one of the symbols of that. I see him riding bike and skateboarding, and the will to live this powerful, and the will to create. And pragmatically, which is what I really love about just creations, is the pragmatism of it. And I deal in salvage. My specialty is 95% pure salvage, no toxins, no imports, all the metals. And so when I listened to the young man in here earlier talk about how can we save energy, I save 900 calories per square inch just by not making glass again, and that's thin modern glass. I use trees that were 1,500 years old, and hardware that was made by 12-year-olds actually carried the coal out of the mine, supposedly. And you see some of that set up over here in my booth. I brought doors and stuff like that that were made back when 12-year-olds did all the work. And so he represents the last of the people to remember how to do all this stuff by hand. Everybody now expects it to happen out of a big box store and packaged goods. And I really do appreciate what he's done to go ahead and make this whole concept part of our generation. And I'm 69, my generation, but the younger generations that follow are more important. So I just wanted to step in and say that, even though I've listened to your talk and it's nothing but full of information, but I wanted to thank you personally because you've inspired me, and I came out here just to see you for that reason, so I could see you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Lloyd before we finish up? Okay.
I already thanked you in person, but it's a cool story, so I thought I would share. But after permaculture school in Oregon, I was like, how do I integrate what I just learned into my life? And I wandered for years trying to figure out how to do that. And I picked up one of Lloyd's books, and I was headed to Texas to work for a natural builder. And I saw in Texas, there was a community that was building out of 100% salvage materials. And it was Brad's community. And so I was like, oh my gosh, that sounds awesome. I want to go visit them. And I did. And it changed my life because I met my current community through that community. And so for the last 5 years, we've been building an off-grid sanctuary in south of Austin, Texas, using all salvage, as much salvage materials as we can. So carrying the ethos on and hopefully being able to share that knowledge of how to move off-grid, from how to be a minimalist and a DIYer, and then it's like my life's mission, and it's all because of this connection and then this connection, and so a lot of gratitude.
Yeah. Any other burning questions before we finish up? No? Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Lloyd.